Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. Shawn Thompson joins this episode to discuss working at an organization with neurodivergent affirming support. He also talks about his previous work of many years working at his state's Division of Developmental Disabilities. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Shawn, thanks so much for joining me here on Autism Stories.
Of course. Good to meet you.
I'd like to start out our conversation by learning about your story. Where does your story in the autistic community begin?
You know what? I think my story starts a lot before I realized it did, because when I was a lot younger, probably 6 years old or so, I was diagnosed with ADHD. My father was pretty against it. He didn't really want him to medicate me or anything else like that. So a lot of it just kind of went, looked away from. I was the weird kid, my whole life. I was the kid that chewed on things and stimmed on all the little things around me and my clothing and everything else. And I just thought I was doing what felt right. I would say, too, a lot of it, though, began in college, with a simple paragraph in my abnormal psychology class, of all places, that really kind of just said that autism was a behavioral and communication disorder. And then the last real place I think I got a lot of my influence and just kind of perception on the autism community was my last job, and then LinkedIn in and of itself. I've met a lot of really brilliant neurodivergent minds on LinkedIn who've taught me so much about the community and kind of the way that we interact with the world that's begun. Just a lot of my understanding of who I am as an autistic person. And a lot of it came with a couple years ago, 2013 or so, I started working for the Division of Developmental Disabilities out of the state of Arizona. And really, they're kind of a state-run organization that serves folks with 5 main developmental disabilities: autism, epilepsy, cerebral palsy, cognitive disabilities, and as of recently, Down syndrome. That's a lot of my pitch coming back from when I worked there as an outreach and engagement individual. But a lot of it, too, was that I worked alongside, case management for a lot of kids and adults for years who had autism or who were considered autistic. And I saw a lot of myself in them. I began speaking to them and really kind of being able to relate to them on a person-to-person basis. And I always just thought it was because I was younger and I was good at relating to people. And it turns out that I was autistic, too.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned that you worked for the state of Arizona Division of Developmental Disabilities for 7 years. And for the last 3 years you were there, you were the community outreach coordinator. I'm always interested in these big, gigantic systems because I would have no interest in working in these big, gigantic systems. And I'm always impressed by people that can navigate those things. I'm interested in what ways you were able to help to develop community that was meaningful to disabled people during your time there.
So a lot of it for me was when I began my job there. I was fresh out of college. I was looking for a job. I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. When I was much younger, I always wanted to pursue a doctorate in psychology and work a lot of pro bono stuff in the community for musicians and other folks who, turns out, are a lot of the neurodivergent community in and of itself. So I originally got my bachelor's of sciences in psychology, and I started working at the state of Arizona just because I wanted to help somebody. I had this drive to help somebody. I didn't know how or where. And so I got a job there, and I started to learn a little bit about some of these kids, some of the behavioral health system, some of the ways that the restrictions of some of these agencies and programs really kind of work in and of and with some of these folks. And I found a home there because I wanted to make everything better. For me, it was a lot of being able to create systems within the systems that benefited people who needed these services. So for a lot of it, the eligibility criteria for me kind of sits a little funny nowadays just because we really do, again, only serve those 5 disabilities. But there is another side of that Medicaid-based side of the agency that really does help a lot of other folks with disabilities. But again, those eligibility requirements really are kind of narrow and a little bit nebulous. So a lot of what I saw, was just kind of like that need for creating a space for folks like yourself and myself who really kind of need that clarity in instruction and some of the caveats explained when it comes to the eligibility processes. Yeah. So a lot of it was that, I really wanted to, when I came into the state, believe it or not, it was about 10 years ago, actually, because I left about a year methadone maintenance counselor for a while. And I had a very interesting year there where I learned a lot of conflict resolution skills, a little bit more on how to suss out some of those human behaviors that we may not always take for face value. So I learned a lot there as well. But for me, the last 3-4 years or so, working community engagement was I wanted to put a smiling face to a big, gray government organization. I wanted people not to be afraid of this agency because I had met so many of the internal people who wanted to help, who were giving their very lives, their very well-being every day to make sure that the folks of Arizona who had these developmental disabilities were well taken care of.
State and county developmental disability departments or divisions, I think, can be so critical in supporting the needs of autistic people for those that qualify for services. Definitely that caveat. However, there can be, many challenges in navigating these systems. People call it red tape, although I've never seen red tape. Like they actually have red tape. I've never understood what that means. But so, what was your experience in navigating these systems? I know every state is different, but what was your experience in Arizona?
And having been, because not only did I do the case management portion, I was an eligibility supervisor for about a year as well, where I just spent a lot of time reading the DSM qualifications, reading into our eligibility requirements, kind of understanding the grayer areas of that. And my understanding of it a lot is there are very interesting lines where they kind of denote whether or not somebody is like high or low support needs, to use the appropriate current vernacular, but a lot of them still really kind of struggle with some pretty archaic terminology and things like that. But a lot of it too really is kind of built around whether or not that person is perceived as having more or less of a disability, which was always strange to me, as opposed to, hey, this person needs help. Why don't we just put a service in place that'll actually help them? We had to then denote how much of their disability on a daily basis affects that specific skill set. So a lot of it for me wasn't necessarily that we were like looking for a need. We always had people coming to us with the need. It was that we were deciding who needed it the most, which is a little bit hard to sit with morally for me. I always felt like, especially as an eligibility supervisor, that I was like the Caesar for disabled children. And like, that's never a fun position to be in. Sorry, I feel like I'm totally spun out on the question here at this point. But yeah, for a lot of it too is like, especially because I got to go to a lot of the conferences as a community engagement coordinator, I got to hear from folks in other states, like Illinois and Florida and Michigan, where they have these wildly long wait lists for services. I'm talking 7 and 8 years long. Here in the state of Arizona, we don't have that. Unfortunately, a lot of it just has to do with whether or not they are eligible for both the state services system as well as the state Medicaid program. So for a lot of it is once you are eligible for that Division of Developmental Disabilities program, that DDD system, you then have a whole other step to jump through, which is the portion for the state Medicaid system for ACCESS, which is that Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System. So then once you're eligible for DDD, we do a referral, or I guess they do a referral. I don't work there anymore. They do a referral over to that long-term care system in the state of Arizona, which is that Medicaid program. And they then determine whether or not that individual has enough points built up on their skill sets or whatever the Altex surveyor interprets as the number of points that they've received for those skill sets to then be eligible for the full gamut of services as well as the health insurance that comes alongside it. So I feel like a lot of the gaps that I saw really had to do, though, with adult care, which is a lot of what we see anywhere, right? That inability to get a diagnosis as an adult, that inability to find employment and rehabilitative services, or somewhere that's accepting and calm enough to understand the difference between autistic behavior and what's considered morally or socially okay. So for me, that was a lot of it, is that like I really struggled with being as unable to help autistic adults in those positions as I was, because there isn't a whole lot of services out there. And a lot of the state based programs are really kind of built on the contractors in an area. So, like, we're at the behest of capitalism when it comes to that. A lot of the more rural areas, if they don't see a need for it, the very small disability communities out there that accept that kind of disability and offer those services are so limited that many of those folks go without care, unfortunately.
I've supported individuals and families in trying to get those services from county boards and things like that, and talked to many other people as well trying to navigate these systems. And it seems like you better be incredibly knowledgeable about that system, or you better be one heck of an advocate for your needs. So I'm interested, for those that do qualify for services, do you have suggestions on best ways or practices in getting the most out of the support from one's local developmental disability board, whatever that support may be?
For the state of Arizona, for sure, there's a lot. I would say make sure that when you do get your case manager through the Division of Developmental Disabilities, that you're communicating really effectively with them, whether that be via email, via phone, whatever works for you as far as your communication preferences. A lot of times, too, with their state cell phones, they can even do texting and voice messaging and things like that. So a lot of it is really kind of built around your needs specifically when it comes to that stuff. But again, just communication as far as that goes. Don't be afraid to let your case manager know about some of the difficulties that you're dealing with in your life. I feel like even when I was a case manager, a lot of times we sat in as almost like a pseudo therapist, because a lot of times we're hearing out the families on a lot of the things that they're struggling with. We're there for the sadness and the happiness, the achievements, the failures, everything that kind of goes alongside helping and seeing that person develop and grow. Just really kind of being open to that, because again, too, especially in Arizona, we do have very high Hispanic population as well. And a lot of times with these state and government positions, you can see some hesitancy because of historically, a lot of the ways the government systems have treated folks like that in the past. And so I would say, too, that the Division of Developmental Disabilities is not a legal status reporting agency, that when you do apply for those services, it is only the individual applying for those services that even needs to have the citizenship. So a lot of that, I really worry that the hesitancy behind that and the lack of community knowledge and that set of myths that just seem really strong in the community aren't being addressed in a way that benefits some of those minority communities that do seem so disenfranchised by these systems. I mean, even in the state of Arizona, too, with a lot of the Black community, they're being diagnosed at a 20% lesser rate because a lot of times some of those behaviors are just written off as juvenile behavior disorders. And it's not that. A lot of it is the same thing that a lot of white and Hispanic children are experiencing, as well as that need for that outward behavior due to overstimulation or any of those other different concerns we see. So a lot of it, too, is cultural understanding and acceptance. We see, too, that like a lot of times in minority cultures, outward physical expressions of joy are more accepted. When it comes to enjoying food or music or anything else like that, we see there's just such more leeway for expression when it comes to physical movement in those communities. So a lot of things like stims or anything like that are written off as just, hey, that person's happy, or that's a behavior they're feeling. But a lot of it is that. A lot of it is the equity problem, the accessibility services. I think, too, just really kind of making connections with those local offices and things like that as well, because they're going to be the ones connected to the resource groups. They're going to be the ones that are looking to advocate from your town for you. And then, too, shout out to Raising Special Kids out here in Arizona. They are one of the best advocate agencies in Arizona for children and adults with disabilities up to the age of 26, I believe. They do guardianship courses. They do advocacy courses in English and Spanish. They do all kinds of different things for the community to educate not just the parents, which is what a lot of we see from nonprofits and things like that. It's really kind of focused on, quote, the suffering of the parents as opposed to helping the individual. But I feel like RSK really does a great job of advocating on the behalf of all individuals with disabilities to make sure that they understand their rights, they understand how to pursue the services they need.
Let's talk about the present. You left the state of Arizona Division of Developmental Disabilities, and now have a new position as a vocational services coordinator. So how's that position working out for you and impacting the lives of those that you serve?
It's been really kind of wild switching from sort of like a public sector position with the state government to a nonprofit sector position with a vocational services organization, because they actually started over in Michigan, and they're named after an individual who began the program to really kind of help all folks with disabilities. So I really appreciate that the agency I work for now has sort of a wider range of eligibility for the disabilities and things that we serve. A lot of it is for me. I run a team of, I believe, six now, very talented vocational services specialists who provide ADA accommodations, like light counseling services, basic case management and crisis management services for individuals who work on contracts for different things that my agency has contracted call center work for, janitorial work for, all kinds of different vocational sectors, kind of countrywide at this point. So for me, a lot of it is really kind of getting in and doing the hands-on work, working day to day with individuals to understand their needs surrounding their disabilities. Finding too that the place that I'm currently working is a hotbed for neurodivergence, and a lot of folks there that kind of just understand a lot of the things that are happening every day. You'll see folks in the hall, taking a stim break, and it's totally normal. Nobody's bothering them or worried about what they're wearing or what they're doing, as long as they're not hurting anybody. They're doing their job and finding their way in a career that suits them and their technical needs and resources. So it's been really cool to work for an agency that really does live up to the messages and the promotional things that they talk about. When I first was interviewed by Peckham, I read their website and they talk about how important people are to them and how much they care to understand and celebrate differences in people and work around the different ways that people communicate and work to the betterment of all the folks that work there. They are an Ability One based program as well, which means we do have a quota of, I think it's like 75% of individuals that we hire are disabled, which we're still kind of building up those ratios right now because we are expanding so much in the Phoenix and Tempe areas here soon. It's been just great to come into an agency that's, just the kindest, most warm and receptive place I've ever been. There's a lot of community development. We have a full advocacy team for all the folks that we work with, as well as ourselves. We're out there helping with homelessness resources and offering community resources every day to those individuals that might be looking for help with vocational services. I watch every day as folks with different abilities, different levels of visual impairment, blindness, autism, different levels of, mental health, behavior disorders and things like that, all just kind of working together in a company that's driving the forward movement of what it means to develop vocational services for folks with disabilities.
I wanted to ask you about a couple of LinkedIn courses that you got certifications for lately, especially because I think these are things that so many of us struggle with. So, definitely balancing life and work. I can speak from experience. And another was about building better routines that work for us. Were there any important things you learned from these courses to improve your life, or was this just a big old waste of time and you just have a certification that says you completed the course?
It's wild. I think back to a lot of that was stuff my previous supervisor had really kind of offered me as remedial courses, as something having to do with bringing me back to the office full time, which is a whole different story. But a lot of it was, sit down, kind of do these courses on time management and work-life balance and things like that. And for me, there were some tips, I thought were really helpful. Working depending on your energy levels is really kind of helpful, especially as myself being ADHD and autistic. I find that definitely fluctuates with the way I've always kind of perceived like my ADHD side of my brain versus my autistic side of my brain. And there are times a day where I feel like vibrant and ready to sit down and do the big thought work. And there are times in the day where I feel like I'm just a little sluggish. Some of the organizational techniques I found that I thought were really kind of helpful, especially with the way how quickly my brain processes, is on my desk I keep an inbox, just like a regular cardboard box. It's probably 4 inches tall, just like paper size almost. And then I keep sticky notes next to it. And so as I'm going through my day, the sticky notes and the pen are there for any thought I have for a task. Really kind of make sure that task is measurable. It's not just laundry, it's fold laundry, or it's a little more descriptive on what the verb is for that task as opposed to just a concept. And so as I'm going through my day, as I think of things that I need to have done or anything else, I'll write that down, maybe a due date, and I put it in that box. And then at the end of the day, what I do is I take 20 minutes and I process that inbox and I turn them into tasks on my calendar, if possible, or maybe meetings with individuals who I need to speak to, any of that kind of stuff. And, some days it works and some days it doesn't. As with a lot of those things, when I'm really on it for that day, I find I've had the appropriate levels of caffeine and sleep and everything else. I'm on it and I've got that thing organized and ready to go. And other days, like, I don't feel like I do anything with it. I just kind of have everything boiling around in here like a hornet's nest. There's those things. I found not only just keeping an inbox on my desk too, but a folder in my backpack. That way I can put notes in there as well. Kind of that, they call it a mobile inbox. But a lot of those folks, there is that one, I think the work-life balance one, the guy that teaches the course himself is ADHD. And so a lot of it has been really kind of tailored towards that experience, which is very nice. But yeah, no, some of those courses were great, and some of them could have been an email.
And the appropriate levels of caffeine for me are just drink coffee, keep drinking coffee, keep drinking coffee. What does that look like for you?
It really kind of depends on the day. If the weather's been weird, if my shoes are on too tight or something, I don't know. There's certain sensory stimulus that'll really get me. I'll either go for a cup of coffee, which is also cool because Peckham, where I work now, has a free coffee machine. So you just go up, you pick your selections, and have the flavors added, and boom, it makes coffee for you right there. And then fresh fruit every day. So having that routine, that ability to come into work and, hey, there's fresh fruit and coffee ready for me to start my day has been amazing for my mental health as well. But it also can be a G Fuel, which is nice. They're sugar-free. There's some vitamins in them and stuff. But man, is that a lot of caffeine all at once. Even with water or juice or anything like that, I tend to drink it really quickly because when I had braces, the thought of that cold water hitting those braces and making my teeth hurt that bad was always awful. So I just kind of gulp stuff now. But yeah, a lot of it is really kind of dependent on several factors.
And lastly, Shawn, how can our listeners learn about you beyond this interview?
You know what? I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I really like to kind of share whatever's going on as far as my job, even some personal stuff. I do a little bit of my fish keeping stuff on there. I always talk about my cats because I have too many of them, and not too many. I love all my cats and I have the perfect amount. But yeah, so I mean, LinkedIn's a pretty good option. I'm in a band called Tarot Blood, like tarot cards and blood. We're actually getting back to it in February, hopefully. So I play music and do all that kind of stuff as well.
So do you read tarot, or how does that come?
My wife actually reads a little bit of tarot. Yeah, she's pretty solid at it. I find that she's predicted some things in our life that have been a little far-fetched for anyone to believe, but it's always been a little odd to see it kind of come up. But a lot of it is that the vocalist for the band, his whole family is from that area of the world where they began all the tarot and everything else. So it's really kind of part of who he is as a person and his upbringing, his father being a musician and everything else. So it's kind of in his blood, tarot blood.
Got it. I love it. Well, Shawn, I really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much for talking with me.
Of course, it was a pleasure. I'm glad we finally got to sit down and do this.
We always love hearing from you and would especially love to hear from you relating to this episode on how your state or country's disability services have impacted your life. Thanks so much to Shawn for the conversation. To learn more about Shawn, please check out the link in the podcast description of this episode. At Autism Personal Coach, our clients are the experts, our coaches are the guides. The majority of supports for autistics are not helpful. They try to fix us, not support us. That's why many are confused when we say our clients are the experts. experts of their lived experience. Our clients are the experts for what has worked for them and about the things that they need and want in their lives. Our coaches first listen to our clients and then ask thoughtful questions, offer resources, and strategize with our clients so they can get what they need to thrive. Would you want a guide in your life to coach you to get you the things you desire? If so, then visit autismpersonalcoach.com for more information. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism Stories, and if you did, if you could tell a friend, foe, or anyone you know about it so they could have the same enjoyable and educational experience as you when listening to Autism Stories, it'd be very much appreciated. Till next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.